Okay, good morning. We're in a very rainy day in Eretz HaKodesh in Israel, and we're going to be learning today about life lessons from the holy tree. There's a lot of things that we can learn from trees. Trees are really amazing creations of God in the world. And we'll start out by saying that there is a famous saying in Tanakh, in the core of the written Torah, that says, Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh, which translates to mankind, people are like a tree of the field. We are likened to a tree of the field. So we want to explore how that is really so multi-layered and truthful. It's astounding. First, we're going to start out with a gematria, a mathematical equation that will really surprise you. If you take the word Adam, which means humankind, mankind, which is Aleph, Daled, Mem, Sofit, those are the Hebrew letters, and you add them up in their mathematical equivalent. All the letters of the alphabet have a mathematical equivalent. So if you add up Adam, it comes out that it equals 160. And then if you take another word, which is eitz, which is ayin tzadik, and you add up those numbers, it also comes out to 160. So Adam and eitz are the same mathematical number, and that's that phrase, Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh, for man is like a tree of the field. Okay, so we're going to be working today with actually a basic Kabbalistic model. Kabbalah uses models from the depth of Torah. Sometimes it's the channels of divine creation, and sometimes it's names of God. In this situation, in order to talk about the tree, what we're going to be using is the model of God's transcendental name, Yud, K, Vav, K, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. This is God's transcendental name and one of God's essential names. And in this name, when you would look at it in a Torah scroll written by a sofer, you would see that in the name, how it's written, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, that on top of the Yud is scribed a little crown. So actually this model, which is a 4-part model, in fact has 5 parts. That's the important thing to know, and we're going to get to what that 5th part, which is always a hidden part, whenever we use the name of God as a model. Okay, so we're all familiar with this statement. It is a tree of life for all who hold fast to it, and all of its ways are pleasant, and all its paths are peace. What is it referring to that's a tree of life? The Torah, the actual Torah. There are many things that are called a tree of life. For instance, the Torah, as we just said, is called the tree of life, but specifically the level that we call the sod, the secret level of the Torah, or it would be called Pnimiyut HaTorah, the inner dimension of the Torah, is literally called the tree of life. And then there's also the divine channels of creation that we call the Sfirot, the configuration that the Arizal shows us. There are other configurations. That's usually the one that's the most widely known, which has 10 basic, it has actually 11 basic aspects to it. And here it is. I could actually show it to you, right? There's that Sfirot model, just for a second so you can see it. So that is also called the tree of life. The Sfirot is actually called the tree of life. What is the tree of life? That's what we want to find out about. And what are the lessons that we can take from how the tree of life exists and how trees in general exist that applies so deeply to humankind? And we learn a lot from them. So this is a meditation of the tree that's based upon, as we said, Hashem's transcendental name, and it includes that little crown on top. The structure of trees as we see them in the world is that it has four aspects to it. We're going to go over these more in depth in a moment. It has roots, visible roots that grow into the ground. Sometimes we'll see a few roots on the surface, but most of the root system is below the ground surface in the earth. And here's a little fun fact, that the canopy of a tree, which is like its leaf branch system, however large that is on a tree, that's how large the roots are underground. Sometimes the roots are even larger. So there's an interesting little fun tree fact. So we have the roots, which are hidden. And then we have the trunk, the first visible aspect of the tree. And then we have the branches of the tree. And then we have that leaf canopy, which sometimes has seed pods. Those are on a level of fruit. Sometimes it has actual fruit. And some trees nowadays don't yet have fruit. We'll also get to that. Okay, so those are the four levels. And then there's going to be a fifth hidden level that's going to match up with that crown in God's name. So the structure of, that's what I just said is actually the structure of the trees. The structure of the tree of light, the tree of life, is that the tree of life, when we're talking about the tree of life on a more spiritual level, we have to picture an upside down tree. So just take that tree and turn it upside down that you have in your mind or in your drawing. And the roots are enrooted in the Ein Sof of God above. This is the tree of life in a spiritual example. In actuality, that the roots are enrooted in the Ein Sof, and the trunk is the tree coming down through all of the tzimtzum, all of the worlds. And then the branches, as they branch out, are the extension of the tree into our world. And we, the people, humankind, and especially Am Yisrael, are called the fruits and nuts. So if you've ever been called nutty or fruity, so that was actually true, right? That's actually the understanding spiritually of a tree. But we live in the upside down world, so our trees are in the reverse. That's okay, we can stay with an earthly tree. And we're gonna learn about what are the levels of the trees, okay? So on every tree, there are four levels which correspond to God's name, Yud and K and Vav and K. And so each level has a meaning to it. And as we talk about this, or as I teach about this, if you did do your drawing, or if you're taking notes, try to also apply this to yourself. And I will certainly try to bring up those points in the lesson. So let's start with the roots. The roots are called in Hebrew shorish. All right? Shorish, if you want to spell it in Hebrew, is shin vav resh shin. Shorish. Shin vav resh shin. That's what the roots are. And in the root system, this corresponds to the Yud, the little initial point of God's name. And it also relates to Chachma, which should not be a surprise because we know Chachma in the Sfirot is also a Yud. It's the beginning point, the initial point of wisdom, of information coming into the world, coming into our world from the transcendental level of God. That being the case, it has a level of being invisible. The beginning is invisible to us, just like even the beginning of wisdom coming into the world, where that insight of wisdom, of new information comes in from an invisible level that's the supernal level of God consciousness, that's beyond our consciousness, right? It's super consciousness. Supernal consciousness would be accurate, actually. So that's represented in the roots of a tree, that the roots are all underground, they're invisible, but they're doing a lot of work. There's a lot happening there. And actually, a tree has to have a very well-developed and rooted system in order to grow properly. And the more that the tree grows, a natural tree on earth, any tree, the more that the root system has to develop, because it's the root system that supports everything. And that root system also, here's another fun tree fact. There are trees that live together in forests or in deserts or wherever they are, in whatever climate they're in, where their roots not only send messages to each other to communicate essential things about survival and sharing resources, trees do this, but sometimes the root systems are actually one huge web net root system of like thousands of trees. Like they all intertwine and connect to each other. There are forests that are like that of certain species of trees in the world. So this root system, which is matched up with the Yud of Hashem's name, represents a level of selflessness or bitul. Selflessness means that it is just receiving from Hashem without any agenda of its own. If we apply this to human beings, this is the level of ourself that's receiving resources from Hashem minus our ego. That means we have to be very open and receptive and given over to Hashem in a selfless way to be able to receive the resources, just like the roots receive resources in order to grow. We also have to receive resources from the higher level of divine messages, in the word supernal divine messages. We have to receive those resources, but in order to receive them, we have to be selfless. Our ego has to be lowered. We have to be have a lot of openness and receptivity, be an open vessel to receive them. And this is like the roots of a tree. Another comparison between mankind and the roots of a tree is, you could say to yourself, what am I enrooted in? Where are my roots? What am I doing on the root level of my existence? Whatever we are enrooted in, our value systems, our core basic instincts and value systems, how well we develop them. And for a Jew, that means to be immersed in Torah, emet. How well we develop them is how strong the tree is. A tree's strength, if a storm comes along and a tree has a very good root system, even if it doesn't have such a well-developed trunk or branch system yet, if it has a very well-developed root system, so when a storm comes along, the interesting thing that happens with a tree is that the root system allows the tree to be flexible, not rigid, to be flexible. In other words, it moves in the storm, almost a little like flexibility, so that it does not fall down and get uprooted. If it has a weak root system, then the storm can come along and uproot it. And then that sort of, would be the beginning of the life cycle of the tree actually decaying and dying away. So that's true of a person also, that whenever we have challenges in life, it's where we're enrooted. It's where our values are. And again, for Jews, that needs to be the tree of life, Torah emet, the truth of the Torah, how deeply enrooted we are in it, that whenever troubles or tests come along, this is where we have to go back to. We have to go back to our roots. We have to go into our core being as Jews and develop those roots and enrich them and learn more. And this is what's happening in the world these days. We have to really be in the roots, enrooted in the system of the Torah. So that's the Yud, that's the invisible beginning and of the tree. Now let's continue on the level of the tree. So we come to the first hay. The first hay in God's name, if you look at the actual otiot, the aleph bet, so the Yud is a point, and then the hay extends it in depth, in width, in dimensions, right? The hay expands everything, and that's true of the tree also. You come from the invisible roots, and suddenly you have growing up the trunk of the tree. You know, it's massive, it's there. And what is the trunk of a tree? The trunk of the tree is the expansiveness of the first hay. And it's parallel to, in the Sphirot, to Bina. We go from Chachma to Bina. And this is a level that's the first level of the tree being revealed. It's expansive, it's strong, and it's has to do with the metaphor of standing. The tree is standing, right? It's standing in the ground, it's standing up. So if you want to apply it to people, we say, what do you stand for? Where are you standing? Where are you holding, right? So what are you showing that's more invisible to your inner core or your roots, your soul roots? What are you showing? What are you manifesting? What are you holding for? What are your values? What do you stand for in the world? Because it's the world that walks by, you know, in a park or in a forest or wherever you're hiking or wherever you happen to be, where you see a tree, even a child, a little child, even if it's the winter and there's no leaves on the tree and there's no fruit on the tree and the tree is bare, and the child will see there's a trunk, the child will say, that's a tree, because that's the essence of a tree, is its trunk, what it stands for. It's the strength of the tree. And that's the level of Bina, of understanding. So when we want to develop the trunk of our values, when we want to stand for something, that means we're actually developing the power of Bina, of understanding, which means we have to really do a lot of our own sort of self-research and well-development of core ideas that are our values to bring them out. We have to enrich them and ground them in a lot of Torah information and a lot of additional information that God puts into our lives so that our trunk is very visible and very strong and able to withstand whatever it comes up against in life. That's our trunk. So we went from the roots, which are called shorish, and the trunk is called gezer, which is Gimel Zayin Ayin. Gezer. That's the trunk. And that's the first hay of Hashem's name, expanded understanding. And then the tree develops branches. Now the branches are the Vav of Hashem's name. We went Yud and then Hey, and now we're up to the Vav of Hashem's name. So the branches are called Anaf. And Anaf is Ayin, Nun, Pei Sofit, Anaf. So the branches are called Anaf, and actually the branches are 6 branches. What are the 6 branches? They're the 6 spherot, the 6 levels of the heart. Vav is 6, right? That's how we know there's 6. So they're the 6 heart emotions. So the branches are the heartbeat of the tree. Now, does this mean that a tree only has 6 branches? Well, no, that's not necessarily true. LP Teva, in nature, we could have a tree that's just developing that has fewer branches than that. And we certainly see trees that have many more branches than that. But on a spiritual level, the essence is of the branches are 6. Branches are just fascinating since they're parallel to the 6 levels of the heart. And we could just think, what do branches do? Branches serve to develop the tree in a system of outreach, right? That's the extension of the trunk that now functionally grows into the branches because it has work it has to do. The work of the tree coming up from the roots and the trunk is only part of the work. If it must branch out in order to develop its leaf, seed, fruit system by which it perpetuates its own species through many different ways. So the branches are absolutely crucial and must happen within a tree's life. Otherwise, a tree is not a tree. It doesn't survive. It doesn't perpetuate its own species. And in its own lifetime, which could be hundreds of years or thousands of years, it doesn't serve its purpose. So those are fascinating thoughts when we apply them to ourselves. Let's go back over that again, and we'll switch it around to a human being. So a person being like a tree of the field also needs to learn from trees to branch out, to do outreach. That means out of yourself. So you're coming from the core, and you're going to start to reach out of the core of yourself, even your core values, what you stand for, even you're in the world. Could be a silent tree, but that tree has to have branches, which means we have to be able to branch out. When we say branch out, it means we have to diversify. We have to develop various assets we have, various unique talents, God-given gifts that we're given. All of these are meant to go out into the world, to be sent out like a branch, you know. See, I'm branched out there. Like a branch, to send out a branch into the world, many branches of ourself, so that we're reaching out into the world. And this is the purpose of us developing our mission, our godly mission. We can't just stay enrooted in our invisible world, and we can't even just stay in the main part of our world, which is the trunk, because the tree has to have branches, and so do we. We have to do that outreach and develop our talents of being out in the world, our God-given gifts, so that we also are branching out and reaching out into the world in many diversified ways. And this is how we reach out, and that's the Vav. And one could tell immediately that in order to do this, this is a level of the heart of a person, right? The heart of the person that's giving, that wants to be able to emulate godliness in the world, and God is giving, so too we are giving. And this is the way that we do outreach in the world. It's from the heart. It has to be a heartfelt kind of thing. It has to be true and sincere, right? We're not just a corporate organizational plan for a project. We're real people. It's not talking about a building. When it says a building is like a tree of the field, it's talking about a person, us. We're like a tree of the field. So our development of reaching out has to be really from the heart. And it's the way that we give of our resources that are God-given to all of us, and our talents into the world, in order to manifest godliness in the world, to share that godliness in the face of godliness in the world. So those are those beautiful branches of a tree. Now, we said that the tree develops branches in order to further its survival instincts and the species and the work that it actually has to do. Because the work of a whole tree goes through all of the seasons in order to develop the last stage of the tree. Now, sometimes you would say that the leaves go with the branch system, that the putting on of the leaves go with the branch system. And others might say that it's an intermediate stage between the last system, which is the fruit. And that's the last He of Hashem's name. And that's called Pri, just like fruit, Pei Resh Yud. So the fruit of the tree, is the place where we express, where we have the final level of expression. And it's actually parallel to Malchus, which is speech. Okay, let's hold on to that for a second. So you have the fruit is the purpose of the tree. You could have a tree growing through all of its season. It actually grows through the whole year. Let's take an apple tree. It grows through the whole year. And you may think it's in dormancy, but during the winter, it's storing certain things through its sap and through its root system. And it's drinking up the water of the rains, like today, into its root system. And it's holding on to it because in the spring, it's going to have a growth spurt, right? Where it's going to start to put on the very first level of what would happen if it was a fruit tree. So it's going to put on like the buds. Sometimes it occurs as flowers, sometimes it occurs as seeds before you start to see the fruit. And then the fruit will grow and continue to grow through into the summer, if that tree's season of giving fruit is in the summer. So then those fruits will manifest fully in the summer. If it's like an apple tree, it's really in the fall. At least in this part of the world, it would be in the fall, in the autumn, in like August, September, October, November, where the tree is actually having its fruit and it becomes edible and sweet and able to be eaten. And in the fruit lies the secret of its survival, because in the seeds of if you have an apple tree and you take one apple, in that one apple, let's say there could be 5 or 6 seeds. Each one of those seeds has the potential to grow another apple tree. Some of those apples fall, some of them are eaten by birds and the seeds are carried, some of them are eaten by animals and they're carried off into other places in the forest, and some of them are eaten by humans, and they're also carried in the ecosystem of the world, so that those seeds come to be transplanted again in another place, and then the species of the apple continues. So it's an amazing ecosystem, a tree, and not only that, but the fruits of trees and or the seed pods, and even sometimes the seeds that are edible, have tremendous nutritional and medicinal value to the world. So the level of giving becomes sweetened, it becomes actualized and realized in the sweetness of the tree that we finally call the fruit, which is its final expression. And that is a level that would be called sweetening. And this expression is an expression of giving all, and it's giving all of its work is being given over to the planet, to humankind, in order to benefit. And so trees are an amazing, amazing creation of Hashem, because all trees are giving. Now, of course, one would have a question: what about the trees that don't have fruit? So we know at the beginning of creation that there was a little bit of a discussion between the trees and God. And the trees had a little bit of a difference of opinion. In the beginning, when all trees were created by God, in the very beginning of the Torah and Bereshis, we learned that all trees were not only fruit-bearing, all trees were fruit-bearing. All species of trees all over the world had levels of fruit, but that the leaves and the bark and every part of the tree had the taste, the tam, of its actual specific gifted fruit, and were also edible. And when this discussion ensued, or this complaint or machlokas ensued with the trees, so God decreased the spiritual gifts of trees in the world. And now we only, at the moment, have trees that have fruits, and trees that don't have fruits. But it says in the time to come, something to look forward to, that we should have the Geula immediately, is that all trees will start to bear fruit. Now, that being the case, I always want to add this point, because I do feel we are coming very close to the Geula. In the last couple of centuries, maybe not centuries, decades of our lives, or even this century, let's say. So there are many things that have been discovered about trees in terms of their medicinal or edible value that are not fruit. We can take, for example, go back to the olive tree. Olives are like very amazing, and especially the oil that comes from them is extremely medicinal, life-giving. That's the fruit. But guess what? The olive leaves also have a very medicinal, high-level quality to them. And they're not the fruit, they're the leaves. And people make tea out of them for the medicinal qualities, which is really, really very helpful to humankind. So that's already, and there are many other kinds of barks or things that show where you could see that they're being used within a system of medicine through various cultures, or edible, helpful benefits. So that's a beautiful part about the tree also in its giving. So we covered the 4 levels: the roots, the trunk, the branches, the fruit. And we certainly want to bless everyone, especially in this month, that we should all be fruitful people. We should be people that realize all of our avoda in all the levels that we just mentioned, so that actually we can indeed share those resources with the world and impact the world in godly ways and be sweet fruit, be fruitful and be sweet fruit. So we did say that there is a fifth level to God's name. And now we have to try and discover what that fifth level is, the crown that's on top of the Yud when we write God's name in the Torah. So, hold on a second. When we get to the fifth level of the tree, and hold on one second, I'm just going to do the screen share one more moment. Just look at the bottom. Okay. Look at the bottom of this, and you will see that within the trunk, there is a word that's called koach hatzomeach, the power of growth potential. That's where the crown is, the keter, is below the roots in Mother Earth, in actually the earth itself. It's called koach hatzomeach. It's the crown keter level. Okay, we'll take this off and we'll continue. So the crown on the Yud is actually an amazing thing. When Hashem first created, through the statements of creation, the world, Hashem imbued into the world infinite powers from his essence or her essence, the godly essence. There were infinite powers. And those infinite powers were called the Or HaGanuz, the divine light that was radiating within creation. But then Hashem saw that maybe that light, that very special infinite power of godly light, would be misused in generations. And so he withdrew the light, right? Now, the interesting, fascinating thing is that there was one aspect of creation, one, that was never withdrawn. And this is the one that we're talking about today. It's called the power of infinite growth that's present in the earth itself, koach hatzomeach. This power is an infinite power of godliness in the world that was never hidden. It always has been, since the beginning of creation, with us, this power of growth. And it's the true origin of the tree of life. What do I mean by that? So we'll continue, right? We'll just talk about this a little bit. So the power that's present in the earth itself, sometimes people like to call earth Mother Earth, and they feel like it's very powerful, so they're not so far off, right? Is known as koach hatzomeach, and this is called the eternal power of growth. And it is the true origin of the tree of life. All the levels of the tree, the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the fruit, are all contained in the highest hidden level that's formless, that's invisible, but it is the very presence of growth which permeates the earth itself, that is a godly given potential. It's actually the power of growth that's in the earth. This is the crown level. That's in this fifth level that's on top of the Yud when it's written in the Torah. This is called the crown level. There's a physical parable in the Tanya that helps to explain this, and we're going to go over the parable now. It says in the Tanya that about the process of growth, that you take a seed, you plant it in the ground. The seed rots in the ground. And over time, while the seed is rotting, it actually decomposes and decomposes more and rots and decomposes more until there is no longer a seed. You would not, if you dug in the ground and you looked, you would not be able to recognize the seed that you planted. It is decomposed. What happened to the seed, says the Tanya? It returns to a state of nothingness. The seed becomes nothing. It decomposes itself. Its existence decomposes into the ground. When it reaches this state of nothingness, of betul, it then makes contact with the eternal power of growth called koach hatzameach. And this is the beginning of all growth. When the seed has decomposed and it makes contact with this eternal power of growth called koach hatzameach, so that's when the seed starts to sprout. But there is no longer a seed. There's the remez, there's the hint of what the seed was. But it's okay because the eternal power of growth that's in the ground knows exactly all those seeds that are planted and all the differences between them. And when it starts to sprout, and that sprout comes up from the depth of the ground into above the ground, it's an apple tree sprout, not a peach tree sprout. That's the eternal power of God in the earth, something that we can't completely wrap our head around. But here's the key point. In order to make contact with and to bring forth life in kinds, like the apple tree wants to reproduce itself, more apple trees, that is the plan of God in the world, it has to completely decompose into a state of nothingness, which we call betul. So all growth, all actual true growth on a person's part is the ability to become, in our physical existence, in our ego mitzias existence, to become betul, to become nothing, to become completely open, and all barriers, all physical barriers, and habitually I'm like this, and I think like this, and me, all of that has to decompose away so that we just become open and receptive and, in a sense, decomposed into the life source, the crown of godliness. And this is the same thing that happens with a tree, amazingly enough, is that this is the beginning of all growth. And this parable in the Tanya that teaches about the seed rotting and into nothingness, and then it contacts the koach hatzameach, and that's what it says in the Tanya, that it comes into contact and becomes united with the koach hatzameach. This is the secret of creation that's called yesh ma'ayin. Yesh ma'ayin means something from nothing, from true nothingness. True nothingness is in the essence of God, another discussion. And the something is really us, the physical existence, all of creation. We're something. In order for that something to grow, we first have to come in contact with the true essence of nothingness, the crown of godliness. So this is the amazing fifth level of the tree that's called koach hatzameach. As it says of the earth, when it talks about the Or Ein Sof, everything is enrooted in the infinite one. The tree of life is enrooted in the infinite one. When we said at the beginning of the class today that the tree of life is an upside down picture of our little picture that we drew, right, of our earthly trees, now we could begin to get it, that the roots, the roots of the true tree of life are enrooted in the Godhead, in the Ein Sof. And through that system of being enrooted in the Godhead, in the crown, in the supernal level, the Ein Sof of godliness, that's how it draws down into the world until it reaches our level where we are the fruits of God's creation essence. And then we're meant to reproduce, just like fruits reproduce. We're meant to reproduce godliness in the world by becoming an earthly tree and starting from the invisible roots where we actually are taking in all the energy, where we're enrooted, how we're rooted, what we're rooted in, bringing it up, how we stand tall as a trunk of a tree, branching out, giving and diversifying into the world, and then at the same time bearing, leaves and seeds and fruit, especially fruit, which are the most sweetened and giving part of the tree. So this is a beautiful remez to the tree of life and how man is like a tree of the earth. And now we want to go to something additional. I have to find it. Okay. which also points to something about the tree of life, about us being like a tree in the Garden of Eden. This was just a small slice of all the ways in which we are like a tree, which Adam is like a tree of the field, which tree of the field usually means pardes, like a fruit tree, right? Like an apple orchard or an olive orchard or a date orchard or a, like that, right? So in the beginning of the Chumash, in Pasuk, hold on one second, in Pasuk 2-9, in the story of Bereshis, it says, Va'etz hachayim b'toch hagan, va'etz hada'at tov v'ra. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. That's Pasuk 2-9 in Bereshis, right? The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, b'toch hagan. Ha'etz hachayim b'toch hagan. We need to understand that. There are actually many, this is something maybe we'll go into more next week. There are many concepts that the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil shared a root system, which means in essence, in some ways, that they were two aspects of the same root system, something to be explored further on. But let's talk about what does it mean that the tree of life was in the middle, b'toch hagan. So, and that's where it was. Hashem created it right in the middle of Gan Eden, right, mamish, in the middle point. So when something is inside the middle point, it means it is in the controlling or commanding position. It's in the middle. It's in the central organized position. It's almost like if you would picture an old-fashioned wagon wheel, right, which had all these spokes running out of it. And in the middle, there's like that little wooden cog from where all the spokes run. That's like in the middle. But this tree of life was in the middle of the garden. And the fact that it was in the middle of the garden means, hold on one second. Okay, we have to go back to something I see. Okay, it's in the middle of the garden. It means it's in this controlling position. It's in this commanding position. What does that mean in relationship to how we live in the world? So the tree of life in the garden represents eternity, right? And it represents the eternalness of life. And it's the secret of Koach HaTzameach Shel Ba'aretz is eternal recreation. So the power of Koach HaTzameach, which is ever present in reality, which is responsible for continual recreation and growth, is a level of loving kindness. It says that this happened, it was the fourth saying of creation. Tadshe Ba'aretz, which is the fourth saying in Bereshis of creation. Now there's a secret of this Koach HaTzameach, this eternal power of growth, which has to do with also it being b'toch hagan, in the middle of the garden, which is the word by which it's called Koach HaTzameach. Tzameach is also tzemach, which means growth. Tzemach is the secret that Sadi Mem Chet is one of the secret names of Mashiach. As it says, his name will be Semach Shemo. Mashiach's name will be Tzemach. Why is the name of Mashiach Semach Shemo? Because Mashiach is the manifestation of the crown of growth. In the world of human beings, Hashem's chosen servant that we're waiting for him to become completely visible to the world, He's amongst us, but we're waiting for him to become revealed in the godly level that he needs to be revealed, maybe today. And he's the manifestation of the crown of growth. Mashiach's job, in a sense, is going to be to help us all to grow up infinitely stronger and more balanced and more centered in our godly connection, and to show us the path, not only on Israel, but obviously all the nations of the world, of how to be godly connected and godly centered, and how to do the mission that God needs us to do on the planet at this time. So Mashiach is in the central position. Mashiach is tzemach. He's meant to be the servant of God, that in a way is in this central position, just like the tree of life was in the central position in order to command what was going on in Gan Eden. So Mashiach, as a chosen servant of Hashem, also shows this ability and will show us all this ability to bestow information and blessing and guidance and direction that's all going to pass through him. He's a channel of godliness in the world, a servant of God. He will be, or it is and will be demonstrated in that way, to give us guidance about how to live a godly life. And that's this ha'etz ha'chayim b'toch hagan, that why the location of the tree of life was in the exact central position. So a lot more about the tzaddik in the tree. That will be the continuation of next week. I just want to end with a blessing, a bracha, that Hashem should bless all of us to take true nourishment, to really be nourished by our deep essential roots in Torah, and to stand firmly planted, this is the trunk, in our faith and trust, our emunah and bitachon in God, and to diversify all our God-given talents and branch out in the world by doing Hashem's will, b'simcha, and to be blessed in all our endeavors that we do for God in this world as human beings, to create holy fruits and harmonious flowers, and to realize God's creation, and to bring to fruition all of God's plan and glory in the here and now. May it be today. That's my bracha for the tree of life and all the lessons that we take from the holy tree.